This month marks the 50th anniversary of the founding of the Black Panther Party. Huey Newton and Bobby Seale founded the organization as a way to combat police brutality and oppression. They began in Oakland, where they famously monitored the behavior of the city's police department, which was notoriously brutal towards African Americans. In 1968, they began a free breakfast program for children. As their efforts drew media attention, the movement grew nationally and chapters formed in dozens of other cities. Members of the party eventually founded more than 60 different Serve the People programs that focused on providing other services such as free medical clinics. The Black Panthers outlined their goal in a 10-point program that included demands for freedom, land, housing, employment, and education. Around the same time the party was founded, the FBI began a secret program called COINTELPRO to disrupt and, quote, neutralize what it characterized as black nationalist hate groups. By 1969, the Black Panthers had become the primary focus of the program, which ultimately led to the deaths and imprisonment of many members and contributed to the party's collapse. Well, over the weekend, many former members reunited in Oakland for one of the many events marking the group's 50th anniversary. This came after Beyoncé's Black Panther-themed performance in February during the Super Bowl halftime show and after PBS aired a major new documentary called Black Panthers, Vanguard of a Revolution. This is the trailer.
The thing that led to the Panthers was what we were seeing on television every day: attack dogs, fire hoses, bombings.
We stand on the eve of a black revolution, brothers.
I was a cocktail waitress in a white strip club 2 years before I joined the Black Panther Party. How did that happen? The rage was in the streets. It was everywhere.
I say that Ronald Reagan is a punk, a sissy, and a coward. And I challenge you to a duel.
Eldridge had this incredible ability to encapsulate a thought that stabbed right into the heart of the enemy. Now, was he insane? Yeah. That boy was crazy.
They were trying to change government as we know it through terrorist activity.
The State Assembly was in the midst of a heated debate when the young Negroes, armed with loaded rifles, shotguns, and pistols, marched into the Capitol.
Do you feel the nation is in trouble?
I think very definitely it is.
What is the answer?
The answer is vigorous law enforcement.
How about justice?
Justice is merely incidental to law and order.
The FBI saw the Panthers as a very, very threatening and violent revolutionary movement. They absolutely wanted this organization to be destroyed.
I felt absolutely free. I was a free Negro. In that little space I had, I was the king. And that's what I felt.
The great strength of the Black Panther Party was its ideals and its youthful vigor and enthusiasm. The great weakness of the party was its ideals and its youthful vigor and its enthusiasm. That sometimes can be very dangerous, especially when you're up against the United States government.
That's the trailer for the Black Panthers' Vanguard of the Revolution, directed by Stanley Nelson. Shortly after the film's release, Democracy Now! Spoke with one of its subjects, Kathleen Cleaver, who served as communications secretary of the Black Panther Party and is now a law professor at Emory University.
When I got involved with the Black Panthers, it was a brand new group. And in fact, there were like 5 when I got there, because most of them were in Santa Rita prison after the visit to Sacramento. So it was a new organization. It was very, very exciting. And all their principles and it was one of the first organizations based on the concept of black power that had been articulated in Mississippi and by SNCC. And so I got involved with them in December. Eldridge and I got married, and I stayed out there and continued to work with the Panthers.
How did King, Dr. Martin Luther King, fit into this picture?
In what way? Well, my picture or the country?
In your picture, and did he inspire you? How did the Black Panthers relate to him?
Everyone was inspired on some level by Martin Luther King. He was a tremendously decent and caring person. He was extremely intelligent, and he inspired a lot of Christians. Now, Eldridge made a comment in one of his speeches in Nashville. He said, how about integrating some of this bloodshed? That was one of the issues we had, that it was too much that black people should absorb all the punishment. And we should be forgiving, and we should want to be peaceful in the face of murderous brutality in the middle of the Vietnam War. Well, that wasn't really a message that a lot of young people cared for. And so when the Black Panthers came out and started talking about self-defense, droves and droves of young people wanted to do that. And I thought that was the best, that's the best. We followed Robert Williams, and he said, if you are confronted by a racist who believes himself superior, then he has, and you're armed, he has to consider, does he want to risk his superior life to take your inferior life? And if you have a gun, you can put him in that position. And 9 times out of 10, he doesn't, and that's the end of the violence. So we believe self-defense was a way to put a reduction into violence, and I accept that.
That's Kathleen Cleaver, former communications secretary of the Black Panther Party. Today, we focus on an overlooked part of the Black Panther Party's legacy, political prisoners. The Black Panthers were one of the most criminalized movements in U.S. history, with many of its members arrested and sentenced to decades in prison. In some cases, court documents show they were punished essentially for being in the Black liberation struggle. In others, it was later revealed that torture was used to extract their confessions. Over the years, Democracy Now! Has interviewed many Black Panthers who eventually won their release from prison, such as a group of men arrested for allegedly killing a San Francisco police officer. Known as the San Francisco 8, their charges were thrown out by a state court because they were based on statements made under torture. This is former Black Panther Harold Taylor describing his arrest in the case on Democracy Now! In 2007.
Well, in 1973 in New Orleans, myself and John Bowman and Reuben Scott was arrested in New Orleans by the police department. We were taken from the place where they arrested us and took us to the jail. And immediately when we got in the jail, they'd start beating us. They never asked us any questions in the beginning. They just started beating us. They had already had Reuben. They had arrested Reuben earlier that day before they arrested me and John Bowman. And they put me in a room with Reuben Scott when they first got me there, and he had been there a couple of hours. Well, he was laying on the floor in a fetus position, and he had urine on him, feces, and his face was scratched up, and he was swollen, and he was trembling. And I asked him, I said, Reuben, what's going on? He says, nothing. He doesn't say anything. He's just shaking. And then immediately the door opens up, and the police pull me out, and they tell me, he says, if you don't cooperate, this is what you're going to get. They made me take off my clothes, chain me to a chair, by my ankles to the bottom of the chair, and my wrists to the sides of it. And I just had on my shorts. And at that point, they started beating me.
That was former Black Panther Harold Taylor speaking about his 73 arrest and interrogation for a murder charge that was later thrown out. Now, 50 years after the founding of the Black Panther Party, many former members are still held in prison based on similar tortured confessions. Others were convicted based on questionable evidence or the testimony of government informants. Widely recognized as political prisoners, they account for one of the Black Panther Party's most enduring legacies. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Democracy Now!'s Renee Feltz in this Democracy Now! Exclusive hour. Albert Woodfox speaking out in a television radio broadcast for the first time since his release from a parish jail in New Orleans on Friday, met by his brother, the longest-standing solitary confinement prisoner in the United States. Albert was served for 43 years in solitary. We are also joined by Robert King. Robert King is another member of what became known as the Angola3. Albert Woodfox, Robert King, and Herman Wallace. Robert King spent 29 years in solitary confinement for a murder he did not commit. Billy Southern is also with us, one of the trial attorneys representing Albert Woodfox. Robert King, you have traveled the country, the world, trying to have the other members of the Angola3, Herman Wallace, who died in 2013, a few days after he was released from Angola, died of cancer, and Albert Woodfox freed, telling their stories. Can you talk about what it means for you to have Albert free?
Yes, thank you, Amy. Of course, I can tell you, for us, for me personally, I think it was joyous. The jubilation in which, you know, that Albert may not have felt, the crowd felt that we were overjoyed. Not that he wasn't. The clouds that perhaps, you know, the clouds that were over him probably prevented the jubilation from being present. But it was there, and the crowd showed it. So it was a good thing for the crowd. It was a good thing for me personally. I think it was a victory for justice, finally being rendered, if you want to call it justice. Justice delayed, of course, they say it's justice denied, but nevertheless, it happened. And so I was overjoyed that it had, quote, finally happened, because we had been here so many times and disappointed and let down. So, but it was a joyous occasion, and Albert is here now, and he's acclimating himself to his environment, his new environment.
Thank you, King. Now, I want to go back to 1972 and this original charge that Herman Wallace and Albert Woodfox faced, that they murdered a prison guard, Brent Miller. A key witness in the case against them was a man named Hezekiah Brown, who said he witnessed the murder of Brent Miller. But his credibility was later called into question. I want to go to a clip from the documentary In the Land of the Free, where we hear from a lawyer who represented the Angola3 and who describes Hezekiah Brown. Now, after this, you're going to hear from the narrator of the film, Samuel L. Jackson, actor. This first, though, is Nick Trentacosta.
Hezekiah first told the investigators at the prison that he was nowhere around. He didn't know anything about the murder. A few days later, he's dragged from his bed at midnight, put under the bright lights of interrogation, and told, if you help us crack the case, we will get you your freedom. At that point, he said, it was Wallace and Woodfox.
And local author Ann Butler's research recordings provided evidence of just how pliable Hezekiah Brown could be.
Well, at the trial, they called Hezekiah Brown, you know, and he said that he saw Woodfox and 3 other black men.
Yeah, but Hezekiah was one you could put words in his mouth.
That last voice was Hilton Butler, a former warden at Angola prison, talking about Hezekiah Brown, a key witness in the state's case against Albert Woodfox and Herman Wallace. Albert Woodfox, can you talk about the allegations against you and who is and who was Hezekiah Brown?
Yes, you know, at the time, myself and Herman Wallace was very active in the prison population, trying to organize resistance to some of the corruption that was going on, the brutalities, guys being murdered almost every day or brutally beaten. And so we think that when Officer Miller was killed, we automatically became public enemy #1 as far as the security staff and the administration at the Louisiana State Penitentiary. And it was, although it was a shock, it was not a surprise I was the first one of the A3 to be locked up in the dungeon for the Brent Miller killing. And the next day I was moved to CCR, and where I remained until my freedom on my birthday, February 19th.
I mean, you were released on your birthday, February 19th.
Yes, quite a birthday gift.
Well, on Friday, as you were released, Louisiana State Attorney General Jeff Landry said in a statement he thanked the family of Brent Miller and that, quote, their support has been instrumental in today's very difficult decision. Miller's sister, Wanda Callender, told the Advocate newspaper she felt the plea deal, quote, was slammed in our face. But Brent Miller's widow has long said she did not believe that prisoners Albert Woodfox and Herman Wallace killed her husband. She released a statement last June saying, quote, I think it's time the state stop acting like there's any evidence that Albert Woodfox killed Brent. After a lot of years looking at the evidence and soul-searching and praying, I realized I could no longer just believe what I was told to believe by a state that did not take care of Brent when he was working at Angola and did not take care of me when he was killed, unquote. So I want to go to a clip of Teenie Rogers, who was just 17 when her husband, Brent Miller, was stabbed to death in 1972. She was interviewed in the 2010 documentary In the Land of the Free.
I've been living this for 36 years. There's not a year that goes by that I don't have to relive this. And it just keeps going and going. And then these men, I mean, if they did not do this, and I believe that they didn't, they have been living a nightmare for 36 years.
That was Teenie Rogers, who is also called Teenie Verrett. Your response, Albert Woodfox, when you hear Officer Miller's wife saying that she did not believe that you were guilty, the reason you were put in solitary confinement and held there for more than 4 decades?
Well, you know, I was, you know, I guess, for lack of a better word, I was shocked when, you know, I learned that she had taken the position that after looking at the evidence and, you know, just, I guess it just never felt right to her that we were a part of whoever killed her husband. And I think it was very brave on her part to publicly state that.
Now, Louisiana Attorney General Jeff Landry issued a statement about the state's plea agreement with you, saying, quote, after carefully considering all of the facts and circumstances surrounding this case and its procedural history as it stands today, our team of prosecutors believes this plea is in the best interests of justice. Landry was recently elected to replace the former Louisiana Attorney General, Buddy Caldwell, who'd successfully appealed to prevent Albert Woodfox's release last year after a federal judge ordered him freed. Another key figure no longer active here is longtime Angola warden Burl Kane, who said he would keep Woodfox in lockdown regardless of his crimes since, quote, I still know that he's still trying to practice Black Pantherism, unquote. Kane resigned last year after he came under investigation for violating prison policy by entering into real estate deals with family members of Angola prisoners. I'm wondering if you can talk about the role of Burl Kane and Buddy Caldwell in the Angola3 case and these latest developments, Albert.
Well, obviously, Burl Kane and Buddy Caldwell made this case personal. So personal to the point where they totally disregard the Constitution, statutory law, due process, lack of evidence, and just decided that, you know, I was guilty, Harmon was guilty, and they would do everything they could to keep us in jail until we both died. Unfortunately, they almost succeeded, but as tragic as it was to lose Harmon, he died a free man.
Now, Albert, can you clarify, please, this no contest plea that you entered on Friday? Talk about, you know, we've come to this point after more than 4 decades where you were able to come to this agreement with the state after maintaining your innocence this entire time. Now you have a no contest plea, but not everyone understands what that means and maybe why you did that. So can you explain that for us?
Well, the plea nolo contendere, it's a plea. For me, it was a plea for my freedom, not a plea of guilt. And I had to factor in the fact, you know, my age, I had some serious health issues, and I wasn't getting the proper treatment for these issues. I wanted to get back to my family. And, you know, my lawyers, my attorneys, they worked so hard to make this a reality. So when this opportunity came up, as distasteful as it was, it gave me the opportunity to reunite with my family and my, and, you know, just.
Well, let me ask.
No, go ahead.
I wanted to ask Billy Southern, your lawyer, about the significance of Buddy Caldwell finally in Louisiana. He was defeated. And Jeff Landry, the new Attorney General, coming into office. Billy Southern, you're one of the trial attorneys who represented Albert Woodfox, one of the Angola3. Talk about what that change of Attorney General meant, and also what prison warden Kane being forced out meant.
Attorney General Caldwell, the former Attorney General, had such a deep misconceptions about Albert and this case. He referred fairly recently to Mr. Woodfox as one of the most dangerous men on the planet. So this is someone whose appraisal of this case has never made any sense. He also committed to refusing to test a bloody fingerprint that was found at the crime scene that was never matched to anybody, that specifically did not match Albert, did not match his co-defendants, did not match anyone that had been tested against. But they had the fingerprints of all of the inmates at Angola on that day in 1972 and steadfastly refused to compare that fingerprint against other inmates, which of course could have identified the real killer. Buddy Caldwell's words on that were, "Well, we won't be fooled by those fingerprints." So this is someone who had such misconceptions about this case that really any sober-minded person replacing him and making an honest assessment of the case was going to come to it without all of his biases and prejudice and come to different conclusions. And we really believe that that's part of what happened, is that a more reasonable assessment was made about the case, a more reasonable assessment was made about Albert, because frankly, no one could have been more unreasonable than Buddy Caldwell.
And Burl, Kane, the significance of the warden and the conditions that Albert Woodfox and Herman Wallace, and before that as well, Robert King, were held in.
Obviously, for 43 years, for 46 years, Albert has been incarcerated there at Angola, and he has struggled, and Robert has struggled, and others have struggled to improve things. And it's a testament to these men that they essentially outlasted some of the very, in many ways, mean-spirited people who were very dedicated to seeing that their circumstances never change. So advocating on their own behalf, developing followers all around the world. Albert, Robert, others have been able to outlast in a very improbable way even figures like Burl, Kane, and Buddy Caldwell, who seem so entrenched here.
And what nolo contendere means as a lawyer, explain. You have Albert Woodfox, who has served 45 years in prison, 43 of those years in solitary confinement. What it means now to plead no contest, nolo contendere, to manslaughter and aggravated, what was it, burglary?
Aggravated burglary. Yeah, so essentially what it means is that Albert gets freed. And the legal proposition is essentially that that Albert can maintain his innocence, and he has maintained his innocence as he has consistently for 43 years, but that it's an acknowledgement that that there is evidence that could support a conviction. And of course, Albert has been wrongfully convicted 2 times by an array of witnesses who lied to secure his conviction. We litigated everything incredibly strenuously in this case, and we were very dedicated to make sure that the injustice that had previously occurred in Albert's case twice with 2 convictions did not repeat itself. And we litigated issues like excluding the prior witness testimony of Hezekiah Brown, other witnesses, and they wanted to just bring in these transcripts of these witnesses. But in fact, these witnesses had lied, and in fact, the government had suppressed evidence that would have allowed Albert to impeach these witnesses at their earlier trials. And you will not be surprised to find out that notwithstanding very aggressive and competent litigation on that point by myself and Robert McDuff, Albert's other trial attorney, we lost those issues at the trial court just recently. We appealed those, and it was our intention to appeal those all the way to the Louisiana Supreme Court. But we lost that appeal on those issues to in the First Circuit Court of Appeals. So those testimonies were coming in. And I've been practicing in Louisiana long enough to know that I need to make a realistic assessment of the courts here, and that the injustices that have previously occurred in Albert's case, we could not be guaranteed that those would not occur again, because this is a West Feliciana Parish jury in the heart of Louisiana. We litigated, for instance, that the venue needed to be changed because, of course, Albert could not get a fair trial in a community where he is infamous and where there's prison guards and associates of the prison in almost every home. We did a 43-year survey of the incredibly damning media portrayal of Albert, and we lost that motion. So the trial was going to be back in West Feliciana Parish. This bogus testimony was going to come back in, and in addition to all of that, we have Albert's health problems, and we have his long struggle, and he had an opportunity for freedom. And that was absolutely the choice that we advised him to take, because for us, Albert's, the incredible things that he's done in prison will only be greater now that he's out, and he deserved the opportunity to be out, and he deserved the opportunity not to have to trust a Louisiana jury to make the right choice in this case when they've done the wrong thing 2 previous times.
We're going to break, then come back to this discussion, and I want to ask Albert Woodfox what it was like chained and shackled to see Herman Wallace for the last time when you got to say goodbye to him, along with Robert King, the 3 of you together for a final time as Herman lay dying in the prison, but a judge demanding of the prison warden that Herman Wallace be freed, or else the warden would go to jail. We're talking to Albert Woodfox, the longest-standing solitary confinement prisoner in the United States, Billy Southern, his attorney, and Robert King, also a member of the Angola3, who spent 29 years in solitary confinement. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Democracy Now!'s Renee Feltz, and we are bringing you a Democracy Now! Special today, an exclusive hour with two of the Angola3. Albert Woodfox, the longest-standing solitary confinement prisoner in the United States, was freed on Friday. This is his first extended television radio interview. Robert King is also in the New Orleans studio at public television station WLAE, a member of the Angola3, held for 29 years in solitary confinement, and Billy Southern, one of the trial attorneys representing Albert Woodfox. Albert, I want to go to a clip of Herman Wallace, in his own words, describing the impact of solitary confinement on his body. He spoke in phone calls from the prison that was featured in the documentary Herman's House.
Being in a cage for such an extended period of time, it has its downfall. I mean, you may not feel it, you may not know it, you may think that you're okay, and you just perfunctorily move about, you know. However, when it was removed from out of that type of situation and placed in an open environment where, you know, you're even breathing that oxygen and it's getting into your lungs and you're feeling something, you know, growing within you, and you begin to develop a different mode within your body. I even watch my body. I've looked in the mirror and I've seen muscles and begin to pop out there. I begin to run even faster, and I'm saying, oh, what the hell is going on here? Much was preserved. But then I got locked up again after 8 months. And being locked up like that, the whole body just got confused.
That was Herman Wallace describing solitary confinement in 2013 as he lay dying in Angola, in prison, dying of cancer. A judge ruled that he should be released immediately. The prison warden said he wouldn't be coming back to the prison immediately, and the judge said if he didn't release Herman Wallace, an ambulance had pulled up to the prison, that the warden himself would be imprisoned. But before he left that prison, Albert Woodfox and Robert King got to say goodbye. Albert, what was it like? Because as you came to see Herman, you and Robert King learned that Herman would be freed, and you were the ones to deliver that news to Herman Wallace. You were shackled at the time?
Yes, you know, because the Attorney General office would not allow Herman, Robert, and myself to have a conference with our attorneys. We had to ask the court to intervene. So they were on the court instructions to at least once a month to allow us, all three of us, to meet together with our attorneys. These visits were taking place at Hunt's because at the time Herman was battling cancer. Robert was free, and I was being held in David Wade Correctional Institution. So they had to transport me. But on this particular visit, Herman was very ill, and they didn't expect him to live beyond the weekend, but somehow he did. And the DOC wanted to cancel the visit. So I was desperate to see Herman because I knew how sick he was. So a suggestion was made that they would let the visits go if I would agree to keep my restraints on. And one of the restraints on is called a black box. It's supposed to be used for travel only. It kind of locks your hands in a very uncomfortable and painful position. But, you know, nothing short of death would have stopped me from going to see Herman that one last time. And so when I got there, Robin and two of the attorneys was in the hospital room with him, and you could see, you know, that he was battling. You know, I kind of felt like he knew he was dying, but he was determined to last for that one last visit, you know. And during you know, he was, you know, laying in the bed, and King and I and the lawyers, you know, we were just talking amongst ourselves, talking to him, trying to find some way to comfort him as well as ourselves. And one of the attorneys was called away, Ms. Karine Williams, and she had a conversation with George Kendall, who was our lead attorney, that Harmon's conviction had been overturned and he had been ordered released immediately. And, you know, I was, you know, all of us, you know, we were just shocked, stunned, elated, and, you know, we just didn't know what to do, you know. So we just tried to comfort him and talk to him and try to get him to understand what had happened. And for me, I had to leave at 3 o'clock, so I didn't get a chance to see him actually leave. But you know, it was just a great moment. You know, it kind of made up for all the pain and suffering that all three of us went through, being locked in solitary confinement.
Albert, you and King are still pursuing a civil rights lawsuit. And your attorney, George Kendall, who's handling this civil case, said Friday in a statement, quote, "Although we are overjoyed that Albert Woodfox is finally free, it is indefensible that he was forced to endure a decade after decade in harsh solitary confinement conditions, longer than any prisoner in the history of the United States. Albert survived the extreme and cruel punishment of 40 years in solitary confinement only because of the extraordinary strength of his extraordinary strength and character. These inhumane practices must stop. We hope the Louisiana Department of Corrections will reform and greatly limit its use of solitary confinement, as have an increasing number of jurisdictions around the country." Now, of course, this has happened both at the local level as well as federally, with President Obama announcing solitary reforms in an executive order, and recently announcing in an op-ed that he wanted to reduce solitary confinement for juveniles. Now, I wanted to get your take on this reason that you're pursuing a civil lawsuit still, and your response to some of these reform measures that have been announced.
You know what, Harmon, Robert, and myself, we had been transferred to a punishment camp in Angola called Camp J, because we had participated in a hunger strike to force the administration to give us, you know, some humane and treatment and provide us with an avenue in which we could help ourselves, improve ourselves. So, you know, we had always, this was not the first suit we had to file about long-term cell confinement. And, you know, when we was released from Camp J, we decided that we need to try to challenge this again. We need to try to change this barbaric treatment of locking a man in a cell for 23 hours a day for decades. And for us, it was about that, and it continues to be about that.
And what do you think of the reforms that have been announced by President Obama and other jurisdictions that are taking steps to reduce solitary confinement? I know you followed the news a little bit. And what's your response to these? Are they far enough, and what would you like to see happen?
Well, I don't, you know, I think as a result of our suit, and thanks to the International Coalition to Free the Angola3 and Amnesty International and other groups around the country and around the world, we inspired other guys in solitary confinement in other states and other prisons to try to do something about this condition. So we put this solitary confinement issue before American people, before the people of the world, and it just started building, you know, and it got to the point where it wasn't just about Angola3, but it was about solitary confinement.
We're going to have to, Albert, we're going to have to leave it there, but we're going to continue our discussion and post it online. Albert Woodfox, the longest-standing solitary confinement prisoner in the United States, released on Friday. And thanks to Robert King and Billy Southern. I'm Amy Goodman with Renee Feltz. Thanks so much for joining us. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Albert Woodfox, who was held in solitary confinement longer than any prisoner in U.S. history, has died at the age of 75 due to complications of COVID-19. The former Black Panther and political prisoner won his freedom 6 years ago after surviving nearly 44 years in solitary confinement. He helped establish the first chapter of the Black Panther Party at the Louisiana State Penitentiary in Angola to address horrific conditions at the former cotton plantation. In 1972, he and a fellow imprisoned Panther, Herman Wallace, were falsely accused of stabbing prison guard Brent Miller to death. Woodfox and Wallace always maintained their innocence and said they were targeted for their organizing with the Black Panthers. Miller's own widow would later urge the state of Louisiana to free Albert Woodfox after she became convinced he was innocent. Woodfox, Wallace, and a third Black Panther, Robert King, were collectively known as the Angola3. For decades, Amnesty International and other groups campaigned for their release. Robert King was freed in 2001. Herman Wallace was freed in 2013, only after a federal judge threatened to jail the warden of Angola prison if he refused to release him that day. Herman Wallace died 1 day after his release of liver cancer. But the state of Louisiana continued to refuse to release Albert Woodfox. He was eventually freed on his 69th birthday, February 19, 2016. 3 days after his release, Democracy Now!'s Renee Feltz and I interviewed Albert Woodfox in his first live TV interview. Albert Woodfox, can you talk about your plans today? You've walked out of the prison. You haven't been free in 45 years. What are you most struck by? What are your greatest challenges now, or your moments of joy since Friday?
For me, you know, as strange as it may sound, you know, when I was in prison, I had established who I was and ways to fight for what I believed in. Being released in society, I'm having to learn different techniques, you know, of how to, I'm just trying to learn how to be free. I've been locked up so long, and a prison within a prison. So for me, it's just about learning how to live as a free person and just take my time. Right now, the world is just speeding so fast for me, and I have to find a way to just slow it down. And, you know, just enjoy my family. That's been a great source of energy, being able to sit down with King and laugh and touch him, and he touched me, and hug each other and stuff is, you know, grateful. He has been a man that ever since he walked out of prison, he has spent the last 15 or more years of his life fighting to get me and Harmer out. And, you know, there are very few human beings who have shown the character and the strength and the determination as my friend and comrade Robert King. You know, the Black Panther Party may not exist, but we still exist. And we will continue to struggle to free some of our comrades. And and to, you know, just stand, you know, shoulder to shoulder and try to take on all of the injustice that we can that goes on in America every day.
Albert, it's so great to have you join us. Can you explain the significance of going to visit your mother's gravesite and why that was the first place that you wanted to go?
Well, when my mom passed away, I had made requests to go to her funeral and say my final goodbye. Warden Burl Kane denied that request, and the same thing happened with my sister when she passed away. My family and friends had made arrangements to allow me to go and say goodbye. Again, Warden Burl Kane denied that. So for some years now, there has always been this emptiness when it came, you know, to my mom and my sister, because I never had a chance to say that final goodbye. And so that's why it was important that one of my first acts of being free was to relieve that burden off of my soul.
That was Albert Woodfox speaking on Democracy Now! February 22nd, 2016, 3 days after his release, after over 40 years in solitary confinement. Following his release, Albert would go on to spend years speaking out against solitary confinement while campaigning for the release of other political prisoners. He also wrote a remarkable memoir with Leslie George titled Solitary, Unbroken by 4 Decades in Solitary Confinement, My Story of Transformation and Hope. The memoir won an American Book Award and was a finalist for both the Pulitzer Prize and the National Book Award. In 2019, Democracy Now!'s Juan González and I interviewed Albert Woodfox in our New York studio after the publication of the book. And how do you feel today? How have you adjusted after 43 years in prison?
Well, hopeful. You know, Robin and I still travel around across America and outside of America to talk about solitary confinement, which we believe is the most horrible and brutal non-physical attack upon a human being by another human being. Throughout my 4 decades plus of solitary confinement, I've watched men go insane. I've watched men physically hurt themselves, you know, trying to deal with the pressure of being confined to a 9-by-6 cell, 23 hours out of every 24-hour period. And being free now, I still suffer, you know, claustrophobic attacks. I'm able to address them better now because my physical movement is beyond 9 feet now. And so, you know, I can walk in my house, I can go in the backyard of my house, I can go on the sidewalk, or there's a park, which I often visit a block and a half away from my house. So the only remedy for me when I had claustrophobic attacks was the space, you know. So this has made it easier to deal with those attacks. And
you write, gassing prisoners was the #1 response by security to deal with any prisoner at Angola who demanded to be treated with dignity. In the 70s, we were gassed so often, every prisoner in CCR almost became immune to the tear gas. You were being gassed in solitary confinement.
Yeah, well, you know, the sergeants were provided with these little, it's like a little deodorant can, you know. And if you would try to get a certain, like more toilet paper, or you complaining about the toilet in your cell not working, you know, and if the officer didn't like the way you were talking, you know, or if you were trying to defend yourself for being handling a disrespectful man and stuff, you know, they would squirt the gas in your face, you know. And usually that would be followed by, they would come into your cell and beat you and handcuff you, then bring you, put you in what's called a dungeon, you know.
in the book, you describe very graphically the situation at Angola when you first got there, before you were in solitary, and the rampant rapes that were occurring in the prison. And once you became politically conscious and you were returned there, you talk about how you insisted that on your in your section that there was going to be no more rapes. And talk about that and the impact that your political organizing had on the way you dealt with your fellow prisoners.
Well, the incident that started the prison chapter of the party to form anti-rape squads was, I was in my dormitory. I was housed in Hickory 4 at that time, and this young kid was assigned a bed across from me. And the saddest thing I've ever witnessed in my life is to look at another human being and see that his spirit has been shattered. You know, and this kid, you know, he was just sitting there, and I could see tears rolling out of his eyes, you know, and you know, I always have believed that in life, an individual or incident raises your level of consciousness. And so once your level of consciousness is raised, you become aware of whatever conditions, individuals, and so how you respond to that, you know, is pretty much determined on that level of consciousness. And I think at that moment that I said, I can no longer accept this. I can no longer tolerate this. So the next day I had a talk with Herman Wallace, and we had, you know, we used to go out on the football field. That's how we used to have our meetings. Like we were practicing football, throwing the football around and having political discussions and stuff. And so we discussed with the other members about, you know, the rape and slave trade that was going on in Angola. And so we decided to start providing protection for these kids coming in, to let them know that they had other options other than being made victims, you know.
How did you maintain your sanity? 44 years in solitary confinement.
Well, I think the fact that, you know, I was a member of the Black Panther Party, I had a political conscience, I had values and principles instilled by, you know, my mom that I grew into. You know, I didn't realize how much my mom had, you know, had set a foundation in me, even though I was resisting it. And, you know, over the decades, there were, you know, we had programs geared toward making the men better. We had schools. We used to hold schools and political classes, and you know, but, you know, as many battles as we won, as many men as we saved, as many men as we helped to keep their sanity, we lost, you know, twice as many men, you know, and, you know, there were times when, you know, I had to fight really hard for my own sanity, you know, and I think the fact that what I was doing, you know, throughout all this, I developed an unbelievable love for humanity and dedicated, you know, myself to doing whatever I could to better humanity. And so I remember reading something from Mr. Mandela, and he said, if a cause is noble, you can carry the weight of the world on your shoulders. And I thought what we were doing was a noble cause. So we were prepared, and so the beatings and the gassings and the decades of solitary confinement, you know, was really, although painful and difficult, it never got to the point where they were able to break us.
It's amazing to me that rather than just leaving it all behind, I mean, it already consumed so many decades of your life. You are spending your life free, talking about what's happening inside. I think, to say the least, it's impossible for anyone who hasn't gone through this to understand what it means to live in a 6 by 9 foot cell for more than 4 decades. How did you maintain your sanity? Describe for us being in that cell, what it felt like.
You know, well, actually, the measurements of the cell are 6 by 9, 6 feet wide, 9 feet long. But there is actually less space available because you have 2 bunks attached to the wall that takes up half of the cell, and you have a toilet bowl, face bowl combination on the back wall, and you have a iron table with a bench on the thing. So you have a very narrow pathway in which you can move back and forth in the cell. You know, when you first put in solitary confinement, you know, you go through this period where you want to scream, you know, because you know, nothing you can do to fight this. Well, you know, in hindsight, I would say it was probably the earliest stage of claustrophobic, you know, and you know, but depending on the individual, as time goes on, you learn to control your emotions, your feeling of being smothered and being confined, and so, you know, but then, you know, we first put this in solitary confinement. You could only have like 2 or 3 pair of underwear and a T-shirt, and you know, you couldn't have books or radios or and those things. Those things were gained later as a result of resistance and organizing and hunger strikes and stuff like it that we won the right to, you know, change.
Albert, you wrote, "My proudest achievement in all my years in solitary was teaching a man to read."
Yes.
How did you do that, and who was this man?
Well, his name's Charles, and we became good friends. And since, you know, my mom couldn't read or write anything but her name, you know, there's certain things, people that can't read or write, certain techniques they use and stuff. And so I picked this up on him. And, you know, the CCR, the cell block, is 15 men to a cell. And the uniqueness about, I guess, in Louisiana, the front of the bar cell is made out of bars. It's not a completely concrete enclosed cell. So I just asked him one day, I said, "Man, you know, don't get mad, but, you know, can you read or write, you know?" And he said, you know, "I can't." And I just told him, I said, "Well, I can help you learn how to read and write, but you got to really want it. You got to want this better than anything." And so I use a dictionary, starting off, you know, and dictionaries at the bottom of each page. There's a sound key on how you pronounce words as to how they spell, you know, and I taught him about, you know, vowels and adjectives and, you know, just basically, you know, and show him, you know, teach him how to shape words, and he really wanted it, you know, because I told him, I said, you know, anytime, I don't care what night or day, you hit a wall, you call me. And he's called me 2 and 3 in the morning, you know. And I can't pronounce this word. So I would ask him to spell it. And then I'd remind him of, you know, the voice key at the bottom of the page and how you pronounce, you know, alphabets as, you know, and help him, you know.
He was in solitary, too.
Yeah, he was about 3 or 4 cells down from me.
How do you communicate? How did you communicate with other people in solitary?
Well, you talk, holler up and down the tier, you know. This is one of the way I developed the habit of waking up in the very early, you know, a.m. because the tears stop showering. There's no noise, the doors are not opening and closing, and, you know, so you are able to really concentrate on what you're doing. So even now, you know, I wake up 3:30, you know, in the morning, you know, and this is when I do most of my read. I still try to read at least 2 hours a day. So there's some things, habits that I develop in prison I still try to hold on to.
Your final thoughts as you go out into the world, as you travel the world, taking advantage of every moment in the free world?
Well, you know, my hope has always been, you know, for a better humanity. And to try to be a part of that, to try to say something or do something that will make, if no more than one human being, stop and think and, start a dialogue that can change into a movement. I've always said that one individual can cause chaos, mass movements can cause change. So, I still firmly believe in that. And so that's, Robert and I and Harmon, we were in prison. The one thing we always noticed is that we didn't have a voice. And because of the men and women and children that were hid behind the walls of prison and in solitary, nobody knew what we looked like. So we had made a vow that we would be the voice of those men and women and children, and we would be the face. I think what people in America and around the world have to realize, that prisoners don't come from another planet. They come from your family. They come from homes, and they might make mistakes. Usually the economic system brings the pressure. And, I know that there's a very small percentage of human beings who do some horrible things, but the overwhelming majority, you come from a family. You don't come from an alien planet. And they need to, remember that, and they need to love them and support them, because prisons are all, any state institution, without oversight and without consequences, unchecked power corrupts. And that's the situation you have in prisons in this country.
Former Black Panther Albert Woodfox speaking on Democracy Now! In 2019, shortly after the publication of his award-winning book, Solitary, Unbroken by 4 Decades in Solitary Confinement, My Story of Transformation and Hope. He died Thursday of COVID at the age of 75. We'll speak to his loved ones after break. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman as we continue to remember the life and legacy of Albert Woodfox, the former Black Panther, who spent nearly 44 years in solitary confinement, longer than any prisoner in U.S. history. He died of COVID-19 at the age of 75 on Thursday, 6 years after he was freed from the Angola prison in Louisiana. We're joined now by 3 guests. Robert King was imprisoned with Albert Woodfox for decades at Angola. The 2 of them and the late Herman Wallace were known as the Angola3. Karine Williams is with us from Middlesex, New Jersey. She's one of Albert Woodfox's longtime attorneys. And in New Orleans, we're joined by Albert Woodfox's brother, Michael Mabel. Michael, let's begin with you. Deepest condolences. You were with your brother when he died yesterday in the hospital in New Orleans, and you're in the studio where, in a studio, we interviewed you in New Orleans a few days after Albert was released from prison in 2016. You were again at your brother's side as you were receiving him when he was freed. Can you share your thoughts about Albert, about his life and his legacy?
Well, his legacy was based upon, change. And no matter what they needed to do and bring about change, one of the things that we lived for, as myself running, visiting with him for 40 years, he would teach me and I would let him know things that was going out. So, I told him way back when I was a juvenile that at that point in time, when I was able to become a young man, that I would visit with him and be with him until, to death do us part. And I made a solemn vow, and I continues to honor that vow, that his legacy go on. So, his body is gone, but I want his voice to be spoken to the world and continues. And he's speaking through me now to let us know that we can't stop. There's a lot of change need to be done, and whatever we can do, And that's my plight, is to continue to do what he would want done. And I promise him in that. So, it was kind of hard, but it only strengthened me. And, I just want to keep his legacy going. And I just want to, like Gladys said, change is going to come. And anything I can do to honor that, to make that change, I want to be a part of it.
I want to turn to a clip of you sitting next to Albert 3 days after his 69th birthday, that moment when you came on Democracy Now! And he was free. This is what you said then.
The only thing I felt and the only thing I can answer is that I know he's a free man when I'm able to walk across the sill of the door with him. And that reality set in when we was able to do that.
We're showing the picture of the two of you together, Michael. What was it like when he came out of prison? You were there to greet him.
When he came out of prison, I noticed one of the things, that he was free. He was free. And one of the things that he done before he died, and we talked about this many years ago, that he wanted his mind to be free. And, that's one of the things they have in this book, definitely stating. But, he was a free man, and he's free now. And, I speak, for him and through myself to the world. And I just want them to know that, that's one of the things we got, and that's one of the things we made vows to each other as brothers, that, we would never give up hope. And I think that may have helped him, and I'm glad as his brother played a big part of allowing him to feel that hope had came and that freedom was there.
You know, that day that we interviewed you and Albert, we also interviewed Robert King in that same studio, the three of you. Robert King, who when he got out of prison about 15 years earlier, just traveled the country talking about who remained in prison. At the time, it was Herman Wallace and Albert Woodfox. Then Herman got out. When a judge threatened the warden, if he didn't release him that day, he would imprison the warden. And Herman got out only to die in the next days of liver cancer. Robert King, you never stopped. And this is what you said as you sat also next to Albert Woodfox when he was free.
When you hit bottom, there's no place but up to go. And Angola was the bottom. They even call it the bottom, and rightly so. And so we were trying to get out that bottom. And I remember one way to get out the bottom is to try to come up and do some things to kind of offset the situation that, the sad situation that was going on in prison. But it was a comfort also to our own mind. I mean, we were politicized. We had understood, that we were, or why we were being targeted and punished. And this give meaning to why we should struggle, more so because, it was an unjust reason, an unjust position we were in, and we had to struggle against this.
So that's Robert King in 2016. Robert, you're joining us on the phone. Our condolences, our deepest condolences to you as well. Joining us from not far from where Albert succumbed yesterday to COVID. Your thoughts?
Hi, Amy. You're referring to me? Amy?
Yes. Hi, Robert. If you can share your thoughts today on on Albert Woodfox, his life and his death.
Yes. Okay. Can you hear me?
We hear you perfectly.
Yes. Well, I was listening to Albert. I've been listening to the program since it started. Wow. It's kind of hard to beginning in my mind. It seemed as if Albert was in the room with me, but those are my sentiments. But look, Albert, my sentiments now, Albert, he was my brother. He was my friend. I'm gonna miss him, together. He faded best. We saw some things that was amiss in prison and out of prison. And we decided that we could add our little pebbles to the pond. And so Albert, just in short, he decided to do just that. He threw the pebbles in the pond, knowing that they would create a ripple and knowing that they would eventually create tsunami effect. And he understood his reasoning for existing, and he lived out that. It's kind of hard for me to believe, but then again, the pebbles that he threw in the pond became ripples, became a wave, and so this will carry him on into eternity. He won't be forgotten.
He will certainly not be forgotten. I wanted to go back to 1972 when Albert and fellow imprisoned Black Panther Herman Wallace were falsely accused of stabbing the prison guard Brent Miller to death. Woodfox and Wallace always maintained their innocence. They said they were targeted for being Black Panthers. In fact, Miller's own widow, Teenie Rogers, would later urge Louisiana to free Albert and Herman after she became convinced they were innocent. This is her in the 2010 documentary In the Land of the Free.
I've been living this for 36 years. There's not a year that goes by that I don't have to relive this. And it just keeps going and going. And then these men, I mean, if they did not do this, and I believe that they didn't, they have been living a nightmare for 36 years.
So that was Teenie Rogers. Karine Williams was one of Albert Fox's longtime attorneys, but that doesn't really describe her relationship. His beloved attorney, Karine Williams. Karine, can you talk about the significance of why he was held, like Herman Wallace and like Robert King, for so many years, again, to be this dubious distinction of the longest-held prisoner in solitary confinement in this country for over 43 years?
Yes, good morning, Amy. And I can talk about that. As you mentioned, he was convicted wrongfully in 1972, along with Herman Wallace, for the murder of this corrections officer, Officer Miller. And at the time, just by happenstance, the Supreme Court had declared the death penalty unconstitutional in America. And so, our position has been, based on the evidence as we litigated the cases in Herman's case and Albert's case, that prison officials really put them in the cells and told them that they were going to throw away the key since they couldn't execute them. So it was intended to be a extra punitive sentence that was not, given to them by a judge or through any lawful process, but by these prison officials at Angola prison. And for the next, in Albert's case, 44 years, nearly 44 years, they were not only fighting to clear their name and overturn their convictions, but also fighting against these unconstitutional conditions that they were in of 23 hours a day in isolation for basically the duration of their life sentences is what the prison officials of Angola prison were seeking.
We only have 30 seconds, but if you can say how you finally got him out.
Oh, well, it certainly wasn't me alone. There was a legion of lawyers, paralegals, experts, and then people all across the world and in communities near and far who supported these efforts of rolling boulders up mountains to get Mr. Woodfox out in 2016. And, since we're limited on time, I'll just say, Amy, I'm so glad that you played the clip of Albert talking about, if a cause is noble, a man can carry the weight of the world on his shoulders. With his passing,
we're going to have to leave it there, but I thank you so much, Karine Williams and Michael Mabel and Robert King. We will all remember Albert Woodfox. I'm Amy Goodman.